Welcome to the web series of the Ocean Science Policy Interface. Now, the United Nations is expected to launch its second World Ocean Assessment in early 2021. This assessment is a result of a collaboration between hundreds of experts around the world. It is the only assessment in the world's ocean that integrates knowledge along with all three pillars of sustainable development: environmental, economic, and social. In this series, we will reflect on the importance of strengthening the science policy interface through such efforts in supporting sustainable development of our ocean. My name is Fabien Cousteau. I'm an aquanaut, third-generation ocean explorer, and a voice for the ocean. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by some special people: Lorna Inniss, who is the coordinator of Caribbean Environmental Programs, the Cartagena Convention, Secretariat of the United Nations Environmental Programme, and the former joint coordinator of the group of experts of the first cycle of the regular process, and Jörn Schmidt, who is a member of the group of experts of the regular process, chair of the Science Committee of the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Thank you both for joining me. I'm really excited to have you all.
Thank you much.
Thank you. Really nice to be here.
Now, we have a lot to unpack in a very short amount of time, and I apologize for that immediately because this is an exciting topic. The topic, of course, is the challenges that our ocean world faces. And with that said, we can talk, of course, about ecosystem services and the deterioration that's happening there, the lack of appropriate wastewater treatment, the marine ecosystems that are being impacted by human activities, the gaps in knowledge and capacity building, the integrated approach that still remains insufficient, the challenges, of course, that we're now facing this year with the relationship to COVID-19 pandemic, and, of course, the need for strengthening ocean science policy interface, and, of course, the regular process to our world's and the World Ocean Assessment that play a really vital role in all of this. I'd like to start with Lorna. Amongst a lot of the major challenges, what are some of the remaining gaps in the knowledge and capacity building that we might need to have?
One of the problems, Fabien, is the variation in terms of the knowledge that exists across the globe. The ocean remains a vast unknown for a large percentage of humanity. And this is a problem in the sense that the ocean really is there as a major part of our survival. But for the most part, we know so little about it. And then if we were to delve in a little bit deeper into the issue of gaps in capacity, I could begin dividing geographically, for example. You've got what I would call the large ocean developing states, very, very tiny islands with significant resources and opportunities in the ocean, but with very little capacity because their populations are so tiny to start with, their economies are tiny, and as a result, they're struggling to deal with the vast array of knowledge that is required. Then you have, along with that, the issue of developing countries in general that are really struggling to bring their populations out of poverty. They see that as a very, very strong imperative. However, the science that is able to inform that imperative so that they develop their economies with a sensitivity for what nature is giving them and allows them to think sustainably about that imperative is lacking also. The links between the institutions, for example, that are really bringing out the science with respect to the oceans, and that science then being transmitted to those who actually need it to set policy is a major, major problem. So I would say that we can identify individual gaps. However, I see the entire ocean as still a major gap in the knowledge of policymakers. And what is even more worrying, and perhaps Jörn will go into this a little bit, is that many of these countries where the capacity is weakest, especially following on to now with the pandemic, is that they're the ones that are talking most about exploiting the blue economy. And for me, this can be a scary vision of what the future looks like unless we're able to bridge that science policy gap very, very quickly.
Jörn, what are some of the major challenges, amongst other things, the insignificant application of integrated approaches?
Thank you very much, Fabien, and thank you very much, Lorna. I think building on what Lorna said, I mean, we heard that there's a lot of opportunities being seen in the ocean and the ecosystems within the ocean in relation to, services, goods that we can derive from the ocean. But of course, extracting that means that we have human activities. We have fisheries, we have shipping, we have renewable energy production. And the challenge that we are facing is that all of these activities, of course, put pressure on the system. And they're doing that not in isolation. They're doing it, all together. And so we need to look at the oceans as a system and the ecosystem as a system, meaning that we need to have all of these activities, at once, and understanding those interactions and the cumulative effects those activities have on the ocean. So we do need to have actually a closer and more integrated look at all these activities. And that means that the knowledge that we are producing needs to be on all of these different aspects of the ocean. So not only the understanding of the ocean and the ecosystem, but also understanding these activities, which means that we also need to understand what drives these activities. It could be economic incentives, it could be societal incentives in terms of employment, or the pure need of, for example, animal protein when it comes to fisheries. So we do need to have this integrated understanding to be able to actually, come up with integrated policies and regulations. But they also need to informed, as Lorna rightly pointed out. So we do need to have the science, first of all, to develop these policies, but then to have the science in an integrated way to support the decision making on the management of all these activities. So, and that is currently lacking. We are very much looking on all of these activities in a very, isolated ways. The World Ocean Assessment is a very good way of, showing the gaps that we have. And also communicating that we need to work on those gaps and close these gaps if we want to actually have a joint sustainable policy and management of human activities in the ocean.
I couldn't agree more. The fact that this is a closed loop system, a very basic statement that many of us forget, and that everything is integrated and interrelated, is of paramount importance to understand and to approach the subject matter with that understanding. It reminds me that at the Ocean Learning Center, we have a program with sea turtles in Central America. Now, sea turtle programs, thankfully, are not unique, but the challenge that we had, and this is what this conversation brings up, is the understanding by the local population, which happened to be the most disenfranchised of that region. The local fishermen needed to have an understanding of the value of the sea turtles, not selling the eggs on the black market, but also addressing their very real fundamental need of providing for their families. And so to be able to address that problem in coordination with the environmental issue, the sea turtle restoration issue, was absolutely paramount for it to be successful. Otherwise, the patterns are repeated. And how do we bring that kind of knowledge, that kind of urgency, that kind of understanding to a public? This is a public forum that may not be PhDs, but are an integral part of the solution building. This gap in knowledge that you're speaking of doesn't apply just to policymakers and enforcers, but also to local populations, local communities. How can we approach that?
Thank you, Fabien. Because I work at the regional level now, even though I was a part of the World Ocean Assessment and that fantastic body of knowledge that I think is going to benefit all of humanity. At the regional level, when we are working now developing programs, what we actually do is to make sure that each program we develop has a community level component. And this notion of citizen science and being able to incorporate the community into the implementation of a program. This is actually relatively new with respect to the oceans, because it was more the norm that it's government, it's the purview of government, it's the responsibility of government to take charge of the oceans, because it's that deep blue area out there that has no back door. That's one of the well-known sayings in the Caribbean anyway. And now what we are seeing is that we can sit down with a group of divers on the south coast of a particular country, and we can say, look, this is what is happening. Tell us how the size of your fish has changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And now we have videos with 80-year-old fishermen explaining the need for conservation. I think that it's not the PhDs that people want to hear from anymore. They want to hear from their peers. And their peers must understand enough to be able to speak in conservation terms, not just conservation for its own sake, but conservation in the context of my livelihoods, my being able to send my kids to school, my being able to feed my children with high quality protein, and as well to make sure that the government, I am seeing an increase in the economy such that our roads, our health system, our services, our education system is improving as a result of us doing the right thing at the local level. So I think that is a very strong and powerful way of communicating that is slowly changing, but gaining traction in the last few years.
Jörn, you mentioned that we need to strengthen and fill the gaps for this for all the knowledge and ocean policy. It brings another bad memory to bear, which is during Mission 31 and the preparation for that particular expedition, trying to gather enough cohesive science that we could be based on. Was a monumental task because there are so many gaps, and one of the struggles I think that we had was to find a place that can be a unifying platform. Is this something that the regular process and the World Ocean Assessment platform can help us and can guide us through a common sharing of this knowledge and of filling of the gaps, which are fundamental to this science policy interface?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabien. And I cannot agree more that it is a challenge to get the science together and have a platform where you can easily access the data. And because, as you said, I mean, it's one thing to actually do the science. And as we heard, we still have a lot of gaps there as well. So we have a lot of knowledge gaps. What Lorna said is also true. I mean, we are talking about scientific knowledge and the science to policy interface, but in reality, we need to rely on much broader base than just scientific knowledge, but other knowledges as well. And I think that becomes really relevant. And this is where the World Ocean Assessment can also showcase where, what is the scientific knowledge that we have globally available, and can also showcase where in areas where we don't have that scientific knowledge, we can also, of course, always ask for more money because we do need to do more science, but engaging, with those communities to also access other knowledge that is available, and then see how we can, put that together with the scientific knowledge that we have, maybe also from other places, but also complement in the activities on the ground. And this is something where the World Ocean Assessment, I think, on a global scale can do that. You always have the challenge, of course, when you have a global process like the regular process in the World Ocean Assessment, how to link that meaningfully to local initiatives. That is a challenge that we always see, and this is, of course, something where I hope that the third cycle can work a little bit more on trying to actually bridge this gap also in relation to linking the high-level process to actually the local activities and local initiatives, and being better able to make the science that is locally and the knowledge that is locally available, accessible to a broader audience, and then people that want to do something in a specific region can access that knowledge more easily. And I think this is something where a global process, even though many people always say like, oh yeah, this is so high level, how can that be relevant for my region? But it is relevant because it sets the ground, to inform governments about the need to actually make that bridge. And in that sense, I think the World Ocean Assessment has been partly already successful in that. And I think that, as said, working on that on the third cycle will probably improve that even more. And in that respect, it is really relevant and important to have that.
I'd like to underline for those who are watching how not only how important this is, but how extremely complex it is to unite all the various information and science from around the world, whether it's gathered by PhD scientists or whether it's, for example, we were in the Amazon a few years ago, and the management of that local area was left to the local community with the pirarucu, the air-breathing fish. And they're highly endangered, but they're a fundamental part of the sustenance, the economic sustenance of that community being so far and remote. The scientists were skeptical at first about their management policies and practices. Having done an assessment of those policies and practices, the local community was within 5% of the optimal management processes that could ever be achieved there. So the scientists were suitably excited. And so you're right. It doesn't. You don't have to be a PhD to make a difference and to implement the proper ways of doing things, locally speaking. And so that was a slight bit of good news from the nether regions of our planet, and that human water, human ocean connection that we want to highlight in this series. The most important thing, I think, is that we all know that we're a global community, and whatever happens on this planet affects us all, from the small to the large, from policies and science to our individual actions at home. And so with that said, being able to be part of a global movement, and I think science is now showing how important it is due to current situations around the world, be it the pandemic, be it other stresses that we're facing. And people such as yourselves have been doing fundamentally important work to guide us to a better tomorrow. And I can't thank you all enough for the work that you're doing. And if anything, we should all support what you're doing and also be part of that proactive movement.
Thank you, Fabien. And of course, we support you 100%. We've been following a lot of the work that you've been doing as well. So this is actually a great partnership, just for helping to bring the information to the world. But imagine the conglomeration of partners. You talked about the incredible challenge of bringing the information, but the incredible challenge of just connecting the partners first in order to connect all the information. Again, I work in a single region, or maybe, you might call the wider Caribbean region a sub-region. And imagine just trying to connect the partners who have indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, regional level knowledge, and then that global wide scale science, and bringing all of those levels of partnerships into an alliance that works for the region and helps us to solve the challenges of the ocean has been vast. And we've been working on this now for 35 years. And we still feel as if we're right at the start. But actually pinpointing the partners is getting a little easier. So again, we're trying to focus on good news. And I can tell you that as part of the first cycle of the World Ocean Assessment, we had a wider Caribbean region workshop. And this is one of the things that I would really like to see in the third and subsequent cycles as well. The fact that you begin to bring the global discussion and debate to the region and regional and sub-regional levels. I think that would be critical. And we're not just inviting the academics and the governments. They will always be there. But then we begin to invite the community leaders. We invite the fisher folk organizations. And we begin to look at these different sectoral groups that actually utilize the oceans for their livelihood and benefits. And we bring them into the room so that we get it ends up being a much different flavor of debate than just with the governments and the academics and the global community. So that integration, we're talking about this wider integration, the integration of partnerships I see as being paramount to to moving towards this integration of information.
Jörn, any thoughts on how we can move ahead as well? Lorna's framed it so absolutely beautifully, but I'd love to hear your thoughts since you're deep into the subject matter as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabien. And true, I mean, I can absolutely agree to what Lorna has said, and I probably can't say it better than Lorna. But maybe one aspect that I think is really important is that, I mean, operating in this complex system and then, having something like the World Ocean Assessment, where you bring all the scientists together, is in a way, it is a huge endeavor. It is in ways not that difficult because we all speak the same language when it comes to bring the scientists together. It becomes a little bit more challenging, as Lorna said, when you need to engage other communities. First of all, because the communities have their, individual cultures and languages and ways of communicating with each other. But from a language perspective alone, I mean, we as scientists are used to communicate in English, but we need to, of course, realize that this is not the first language for most of the people on this planet, which means that linking through workshops into, having those that are attending those workshops or serving as ambassadors into the individual countries and into the individual communities, in communicating then in the respective language, and also breaking the complexity of the issues down to something that is more tangible for the local communities. And that is something that I believe is actually not that difficult, because when we look at, and I'm bringing in now the Sustainable Development Goals as kind of an overarching umbrella in a way of setting objectives. A lot of that can be agreed upon on a high level, but it's also true on a local level. So I think to communicate that down, to make it more tangible to the local communities, should be doable. What is important is, of course, that it also communication works the other way around. So whatever then is being discussed on the local scale needs to come through. And again, then, bringing that knowledge and that feedback through either regional workshops or other mechanisms that is gathering that knowledge and that communication through, again, to the upper level. I think that's important. So we do need to have this two-way, we need to have a dialogue on all these different scales. And I think this is important. And this is where, even a global process, high level, very distant, can actually have an effect on the ground if we ensure that, this dialogue happens. And we all know, working with people means you need to focus on communication. And there's, many different ways, and we are investigating how we can actually do that in a more meaningful way, specifically now in the third cycle, when we want to approach more, and look more into, how to engage, wider communities and strengthen them through that also the science policy interface. Because, policy in the end is being driven by what the people want. So you also need to have that communication. And if that is happening, and if the people say, okay, this is what we want, then also science can more meaningfully, feed into the decision making that then the policy is been doing. So I think that is maybe the aspect that I wanted to add on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just a curious boy in a man's body that's been shepherded by some amazing pioneers when I was growing up, and tweaked my curiosity. This ocean part of our planet, as much as people think we know a lot about it, is actually still quite a mystery. 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, 5% of which has been explored. And yet it's the underpinnings to everything that we depend on this planet. It quite literally is a life support system for all life that we know. So for me, it's right there is daunting on one end, and on the other side, it's makes me want to go diving, and diving to many things. But to the point is that we all, whether we're scientists or scientifically driven or not, need to invest and support science, because it's the fundamental knowledge that and the universal language that can address the discussions with local communities, just like it can play a vital role in policy making. And the policies, as you mentioned, are the rules and regulations, so to speak, that we can all, as a global community, follow to shepherd the health of our life support system. And at the end of the day, unless we're all buying into this, and all of us citizens of the world, from the president of a country down to the fisherman in a remote part of the world, we're not going to get ahead of the problems. And that's something that is of fundamental importance. And to play a little bit into both of your comments, having the communities engaged in innovative solutions that address their real, tangible daily needs, as well as shepherding a conservation of our life support system, is something that is of fundamental importance. And diving into those solutions will be a topic for the next podcast. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Jörn. Thank you, Lorna. You all are champions in my heart, and anything I can do to support you, and I encourage anyone who's watching to support you and the United Nations for the next World Ocean Assessment as well. I can't thank you enough for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.